Hello. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a technology that has fallen into oblivion, but still remains in our lives in some way. Old push-button phones. In this age of touchscreens, some people still type messages by pressing buttons. And some phones still make a beep-beep sound. Why? How? What is behind this silent but stubborn resistance? The first examples of push-button phones appeared in the early 1980s alongside analog systems. Most of these devices weighed around 500 grams. Their plastic bodies were gray or black. The buttons were usually made of rubber. Their audio feedback was limited to a click or tick sound. By the 1990s, the Nokia 1011 was introduced with a digital cellular system. This was one of the first models with a SIM card. Its battery provided approximately 4 hours of talk time. But this battery only had a standby time of 14 hours. Today, I will introduce you to a forgotten yet still living technology of the modern world. Push-button phones. Yes, they still exist. And they are still used by some people. Throughout this video, we will discuss the history, structure, evolution, and reasons why this stubborn technology has managed to survive in our lives in a detailed and somewhat sleepy manner. The history of push-button phones dates back to the early 1980s. At that time, phones were only used for making calls. The first models were heavy, weighing between 400 and 600 grams on average. The buttons were made of rubber and made a mechanical sound like click or tick when pressed. These sounds are almost nostalgic today. Back then, antennas were extended to improve reception. The batteries were large, and charging times were very long. It took about 10 hours to fully charge a phone. In return, it offered only a few hours of talk time. In the mid-1990s, brands like Nokia, Ericsson, and Motorola began to dominate the keypad phone market. The Nokia 1011 was one of the first models with a SIM card. It was known for its black and white screen, ability to display a single line of text, and limited menu navigation. The keypad typically had 12 keys, numbers from 0 to 9, a star key, and a pound key. Some models also included directional keys, but this was a much later addition. At that time, messaging was not yet widespread. Keypad phones were designed solely for calls. The biggest revolution in keypad phones occurred in 1997. The Nokia 5110 model was released. This model featured interchangeable covers. Yes, users could now replace their phone's cover with a colorful one. This was a small but notable innovation. The keys were now softer. The screen was slightly wider, but it was still black and white. The phone book capacity was usually limited to 120 people. The ringtones were monophonic. Polyphonic sounds had not yet been discovered. The battery had a capacity of 900 milliamp hours. This provided approximately 4 to 5 hours of talk time. In the 2000s, we saw the evolution of keypad phones. Color screens appeared. Menu systems became more advanced. However, the key layout remained unchanged. The 12 main keys stayed the same. SMS was now widely used. To write a message, you had to press a key multiple times for each letter. For example, to type the letter C, you had to press the 2 key 3 times. This process was slow, but familiar. People did not complain about typing messages this way back then, because there was no other option. Predictive text, or the T9 system, alleviated this issue somewhat, but most users continued to use the classic method. Keypad phones dominated the market until 2007. However, something happened that year. the iPhone was released. Touchscreens, internet browsers, app stores, everything changed. But keypad phones didn't completely disappear. In fact, some brands continued to produce keypad models even after this transformation, especially in low-income countries, for business phones, in military fields, for elderly users, and for individuals who only use phones for calls. Keypad models were still the preferred choice for many. Why? Why does such a simple and outdated technology persist despite today's advanced devices? The answer is simplicity. Keypad phones don't break. Their keys don't crack like touchscreens. Their batteries last for days. A keypad phone can stay on standby for 6 to 8 days on a single charge. Talk time can reach up to 15 hours. Plus, many models still have FM radio. Some even have a flashlight. And most keypad phones don't break when dropped. The battery cover just pops off, then you put it back on and it keeps working. Today, models like the Nokia 105 are still used by millions of people worldwide. These models are particularly widespread in African, Asian, and Middle Eastern markets. Some people even use a keypad phone as a second line, independent of their smartphone, just to make calls, send messages, or simply stay reachable. The battery was one of the quietest but most reliable parts of push-button phones. We didn't notice it much in our daily lives, but its absence was immediately felt. When a phone's battery was full, we felt at ease. Because that fullness was not just energy, but also peace of mind. Seeing a fully charged battery icon on the device's screen was almost like a guarantee. That phone wouldn't shut down for days. Messages would be received, calls would be made, alarms would ring. No task would be left unfinished. The batteries of keypad phones didn't run out easily. When new, some models could last a week, and in some cases up to 10 days. You didn't check the battery in the morning. Forgetting to plug it in at night didn't cause any problems. The phone wouldn't leave you stranded. This reliability fostered a sense of trust in those devices. Going out with a full battery didn't require the same preparation as carrying a power bank today. Because the phone was as cautious as you were. In the early days, batteries were large. When you opened the back of the device, the thick battery that greeted you almost gave the device its shape. The battery cover was usually opened with a fingernail, and the battery was removed with a little effort. One of the first things everyone learned with their phone was this. When the charge runs out, remove the battery, wait a bit, and put it back in. This process sometimes fixed the charging error, and sometimes it was just done out of habit. But in any case, the battery was a tangible, visible part of the device. That's why the charging issue wasn't as complicated as it is today. If the battery was full, everything was fine. Chargers were also small but had their own special place. Each brand had its own charging port. A Nokia charger usually didn't fit another brand. So when the charger was lost or forgotten, people would ask around, "Does anyone have the same phone?" Chargers were kept in a fixed corner at home, and labels were often stuck on them to prevent them from getting lost. In some homes, a fixed cable would run alongside the outlets, near the wall. The end of that cable was always ready. Because charging wasn't just a necessity, it was like a form of maintenance. When keypad phones were charging, a large battery icon would appear on the screen. As that icon filled up, one felt a sense of peace. Each segment that filled up meant a little more confidence, a little more calm. Using the phone while it was charging wasn't common. The device seemed to rest a bit while it was plugged in. It charged, it breathed. Concepts like fast charging, percentage, or battery health didn't exist. There was just the battery. It was either full or empty. And it was usually full. When a button phone's battery went bad, it was immediately noticeable. First, the charging time would start to decrease. Then, the need to charge it during the day would arise. This was an odd situation for the user, because a weekly routine suddenly turned into a daily concern. Back then, people would buy batteries. That is, they would replace the battery directly, not just the cable. Mobile phone stores sold spare batteries in small plastic boxes. It was a quick process. The phone's cover was opened, the battery was removed, and the new one was installed. It was like being reborn. One of the most interesting habits was trying to reboot the battery by shaking or rubbing it. While it is still debated whether this process actually worked, many users believed it did. Especially with older batteries, they would drain faster in the cold, then start working again after sitting inside for a while. These behaviors were part of an intuitive relationship with a technological device. That device was no longer just a tool, but a friend with a personality. And another fact: keypad phones wouldn't shut off before the battery ran out. They would give a prolonged warning. Usually the low battery sound would play softly. The message "low battery" would appear on the screen. Then the screen would gradually dim. The user would feel this process. The battery running out was not an abrupt disconnect, but a farewell. It was a sign saying, "That's enough for today." The device did not shut down suddenly. It said goodbye. This increased the trust felt toward it. Today, smartphones are charged in the morning and plugged back in at night. This cycle is tedious, but necessary. But in button phones, the battery was a simplicity that was often forgotten, but immediately missed when absent. It was quiet. It was durable. It was always there. And perhaps that's why it was once the unsung hero at the center of everything. Ringing tones were the first thing to break the silence of the push-button telephone era. The sound of a ringing telephone in a room did not merely signal a call. It indicated that someone was there, that communication had begun, and sometimes that someone had been remembered. In those days when silence reigned, the ringing tone was often the only technological alert in the house or classroom. That is why it attracted attention. When people heard that sound, they couldn't help but turn toward it. Who was calling? Whose phone was ringing? Everyone who heard the sound glanced around. Trying to find the owner of that sound was one of the small reflexes of that era. In the early days, phones had only a few ringtones. These sounds were usually monophonic, meaning they were single-channel. Simple melodies consisted of a few repeated notes. They were mostly high-pitched, sharp sounds. Because such tones were more effective in terms of audibility in crowded places. These melodies, which had names like classic ring, beep once, and ascending, did not offer users many options, but each had its own character. Some users preferred fast and sharp melodies, while others chose softer and longer tones. This preference alone provided small clues about a person's character. Then came customizable ringtones. In some models, users could create their own melodies by entering specific notes in sequence. This feature, called Ringtone Composer, allowed even people with no musical knowledge to create small compositions. Fingers searched for notes on the keys, paused, and repeated. The short melody that emerged then became someone's own sound for a while. These small compositions were so simple and interesting that they sometimes became a topic of conversation on their own in social settings. "Look, I wrote this," one person would say. "I made something similar," another would reply. The ringtone was no longer just a call. It was a means of expression. Later, polyphonic ringtones arrived. This meant that multiple notes could be played simultaneously. It was a significant technological advancement. Melodies were now richer and more realistic. People could carry a wide range of melodies on their phones, from classical music pieces to pop songs. But the sounds were still digital. They weren't like a real instrument, but they sparked the imagination. Hearing a melody play and guessing which song it was a separate pleasure. And being the one to notice it in just a few seconds felt like a small victory. Each new model came with a few more ringtones. Some devices even allowed you to assign personalized ringtones to specific people. This was one of the great luxuries of that era. Having a different melody play when your mother called versus when your lover called. This small distinction was a significant form of personalization, because you could tell who was calling just by the sound, without even looking at the phone screen. This also created a sense of attachment. Associating ringtones with people was essentially about attaching an emotion to that person. Sometimes when a relationship ended, it was hard to change that melody, because hearing that melody was like hearing that person again. The duration of the ringtone was also important. Some users answered the phone immediately after the first ring, while others waited for it to ring a few times. Especially in crowded environments, people didn't rush to answer the phone, because the first few seconds were spent trying to locate the phone. The phone in your pocket would vibrate slightly while ringing, reminding you of its presence with its melody. That familiar sound, echoing with the vibration, would linger in one's mind. Some ringtones, even years later, would instantly transport a person back to the past when heard again. There were also stories of forgotten ringtones, phones that were accidentally silenced, causing disappointment when they failed to ring at the right moment, or the moment when a funny melody rang out loudly in a crowd, drawing everyone's attention. The ringtone was not just a device's alert, it was part of the moment. It was the music of that moment. It was like a small spotlight brought by technology. And sometimes, in a moment when everyone was silent, only it rang. Ringtones were like the audio ID cards of an era. Unlike today, where everyone has headphones in their ears and screens in their eyes, the ringtone was the only way to make oneself heard. Now smartphones are quieter. Calls are received through vibrations, with a quick glance at the screen. But with keypad phones, every melody that played was an attention-grabbing event. People would pick up the phone and think, who could it be? That curiosity, that excitement, sometimes turned into disappointment, sometimes into a smile. In the world of push-button phones, everything was limited. But within those limitations, people's efforts to express themselves were high. There were also emergency numbers. 112. Ambulance. Home phone. Neighbor Aishi. Neighborhood taxi. These numbers were usually added at the beginning of the directory, because you needed to be able to reach them immediately when necessary. Back then, you looked up numbers in the directory, not on the internet. You organized it yourself and created your own system. The phone book was both a technological convenience and a personal notebook, and perhaps that's why dial-up phone books were more meaningful. Each entry was written by hand, organized by hand, and erased by hand. There was no automatic matching. Artificial intelligence didn't make suggestions. Only you knew. You'd ask yourself, who was this person? You'd search your memory. Forgetting was possible, but remembering was valuable. That's why keypad phones encourage remembering, not forgetting. Today, directories with thousands of entries are carried in a pocket. But back then, the connection with 100 people was more sincere, more real. Because what is scarce is valuable. And being in the directory of a keypad phone was not just an entry, it was a place. Everything began with a few letters appearing in the middle of a screen. New message. Sometimes a vibration. Sometimes a single beep. But in any case, when a message arrived, the moment was significant. Because what came was not just text, but news, an emotion, a call. In the era of keypad phones, SMS or short messages carried a meaning far beyond its name, because that message was limited. It was restricted to 160 characters, and this limitation made every word valuable. Writing a message wasn't just about quickly pressing the keys with your fingers. Each letter was formed with several presses. For an S letter, you had to press the 7 key 4 times. Even writing hello took time. But within that time, the sentence slowly took shape, forming in the mind. The question, how am I writing, became more important than what am I writing. As the letters slowly appeared on the screen, thoughts progressed at the same pace. Sometimes the message was short but deep. Sometimes you wanted to extend it, but the character limit ran out. That's why the real skill was in condensing the emotion into short sentences. Messages usually ended with 3 dots. Okay. See you tomorrow. What are you doing? These 3 dots conveyed not only the sentence, but also a sense of anticipation. Because after sending a message, you didn't expect an immediate reply. You had to wait for the other person to find the right time. If the phone didn't ring, they hadn't seen it yet. Maybe they didn't have their phone with them. Maybe they had read the message, but hadn't started writing a reply yet. This uncertainty was not a source of tension, but a sign of respect for the process. The slowness of time refined communication. People waited patiently, because patience was part of communication. Sometimes a message would go unanswered for an entire day, but this did not mean it was being ignored. On the contrary, one would ponder when the message was read and why the response was delayed. Perhaps a careful response was being prepared. Perhaps there was an excuse. Or perhaps it simply needed a little time. This uncertainty added a little mystery to relationships, prompting people to think. Every message invited a mental narrative. And of course, some messages were read multiple times, especially the important ones. I miss you too. I'm glad you're here. Take care of yourself. The message comes only once, but it stays in the mind even after the screen light fades. One opens the message, reads it again, and again, as if searching for another meaning hidden beneath the letters. Perhaps a hope, perhaps an apology, perhaps just to feel the digital trace of that voice. Because back then, SMS was not just a message, but a way of connecting. Some users didn't delete their messages. Even if the phone's memory had a capacity of 50 messages, those messages were saved. Until the device issued a warning. Memory full. New messages cannot be received. That's when a painful decision had to be made. Which message should be deleted? Which good morning message should no longer be saved? Whose good night should now be left in the past? That deletion process was not a cleanup, but a farewell. And most of the time, these farewells were postponed. Because some messages were the digital fossils of experiences. There were also group messages. On holiday mornings, New Year's, before exams, on birthdays, texts sent to 10 people at the same time, wishing everyone a happy holiday. These messages were sometimes heartfelt, sometimes rushed, but each one was an effort to communicate. Today, you can write to everyone at once with group messages. But back then, each number had to be selected individually. Each recipient was a choice. Should this one receive it too? Was considered. Some games evolved over time with variations. There were different versions of Snake. 2-player modes, polygonal maps, and speed levels were added. But the essence of the game remained unchanged. Always the same simplicity. Always the same rhythm. Sometimes the hardware limitations of the phone determined the game design. That's why logic took precedence over graphics. And this made the player's mind a part of the game. Every press was a decision, every move a calculation. The keys became one with the game. Just like playing a musical instrument, the finger memorized the key's position, and the player became one with the game. The games on the keypad phone never told you how many hours you had played. There was no app usage time. There was no parental control. There were no reports reminding you how many minutes of the day you had spent playing, because no one would say, "You're playing too much." The game was played and ended. All that remained was a score and a memory. Looking back at these games today, it might be hard to play them again. The graphics are too simple, the sounds too slow, the gameplay too limited. But back then, these games offered something no other game could: focus within stillness. There was little movement on the screen, but plenty of imagination in the mind. Time moved slowly, and you moved in sync with the game. And that's why those games didn't tire you out. They didn't stress you out. On the contrary, they relaxed you. Your mind was occupied, but your body rested. And perhaps that's why one of the first things someone does when they pick up an old Nokia still sitting in a drawer is to go into the menu and try to find Snake. Because they know there's still a snake slithering around. There's still a score. And time is still flowing a little slower. The address book is one of the quietest yet most meaningful parts of a phone. It appears as a single menu option. When opened, it displays a simple list: names, numbers, sometimes short notes, sometimes just letters. But that list is actually a digital reflection of human relationships. Keypad phones keep this list simple. It is usually limited to 100 people, 100 entries. That's it. And this limitation forces you to think. You want to add a new number, but if there's no space left, someone must be deleted. At that moment, you have to make a decision. Who is no longer in your life? Who haven't you spoken to in a long time? Whose name has become just a memory? That's why the address book is not just a list, but also an emotional organizing space. Each person is not just a number, but a witness to a time. Ahmet, Izmir. Aishi hairdresser. Murat new number. Some become history. Some are not deleted, but are not searched for. They remain there silently. Perhaps just a button away, but now very far away. Names are often written incompletely. Enver, Brother Cem, Aunt Nurten, Samuel Taxi. Sometimes there is no last name, because for someone familiar, the first name is enough. But for some, an explanatory note is needed. Ebru from school. Selim old job. Murat, send a message if you don't answer. These parenthetical notes are the stories behind the scenes. Life unfolds between the lines of the address book. The nature of relationships, fragments of memory, forgotten intimacies are written there. The people you talk to most often are usually at the top of the address book, because old devices could mix up the alphabetical order based on recent calls. Mom, Dad, home, my love. Maybe emojis weren't around back then, but some phones allowed you to add symbols like hearts, stars, or arrow signs to express emotions. Some users would copy these symbols and place them at the beginning of names, because names should be as personal as they are straightforward. Each letter carried a memory. Getting someone's number was a privilege, especially in youth, when you got a girl's or a guy's number. It opened up a new world in your phone's address book. That person wasn't just a number. It meant a potential conversation, a friendship, maybe even love. Care was taken when writing down a number, letter by letter, carefully. Sometimes numbers were obtained not intentionally, but secretly. Mysterious names like Met on the Road or Mert Dolmusch are remnants of those memories. The address book was also an extension of memory. There was no need to memorize every number, but some were still etched into memory. A number starting with 0532 became associated with someone's voice. Sometimes when the battery died or the phone was lost, you had to remember that number. That's when the importance of memorization became clear. Keypad phones only stored the contacts you saved in the address book for your own use. There was no cloud. A SIM card could store up to 250 contacts, but most of the time, the device's memory was used, and when the device was replaced, the numbers could be lost. This was another test of memory. Some people set their alarms to vibrate rather than ring. This was especially common in crowded homes. Vibration was preferred so as not to disturb others. The phone was placed under the pillow, and a gentle vibration would wake you up. This vibration was not a sound, but a movement. And this movement would gently wake you up. Sometimes you didn't wake up. Sometimes you didn't notice the vibration and missed the alarm. But even that didn't cause any panic, because the alarm's purpose was only to alert. It had no judgmental, coercive, or pressuring nature. Button phones simply reminded you in the morning. The day was yours. The decision was yours. Perhaps that's why mornings were slower back then. Quieter. People would wake up, wash their faces, have breakfast, then check their phones. The first 10 minutes passed without phones. No one reached for the screen the moment they opened their eyes, as they do today. Because there was no world waiting on the screen, just a small clock, and a small alarm history. Even today, some people still use their old push-button phones as alarms, because they know those simple melodies want nothing else. No notifications, no colorful screens, no updates. Just the morning. Just you. And just time. One of the most surprising things about the silent world of keypad phones was that they had games. Because back then, phones were thought to exist only for calls and messages. But one day, when you pressed the menu button, a word appeared that opened a new door in your mind. Games. Maybe just one option, maybe two. But they all promised the same thing. Timeless fun. And of course, the most prominent game, Snake. Snake. Everyone knows this game, but the fact that such a simple mechanism could occupy so much space in the human mind is a strange but real phenomenon. On the screen, only a line appears against a black background. This line slowly grows longer. It turns around itself. If it doesn't hit the wall or wrap around its tail, It continues to grow. It eats dots. The score increases. And the finger guides this snake using the 2468 keys. A simple logic, a deep hypnosis. Hours pass this way, while not paying attention in class, waiting for the bus, lying in bed at night. The finger's muscle memory begins to move the snake without even thinking about it. It's almost like a reflex. The snake had no sounds. It had no graphic effects. But getting so immersed in a game is still rare today. Because there were no interruptions in the game, no ads, no updates. You press the menu button, and the continue game message appears, and you continue from where you left off. If the score was 73, you keep going from there. This continuity didn't require synchronization or cloud storage like today. Everything was inside the device, quietly waiting. It played with you, at your pace. But it wasn't just Snake. There was Space War, Ant Smasher, Bouncing Ball, Block Breaker, and even Sudoku and chess in some models. Each came with different challenges, but they all offered the same thing: getting lost in simplicity. Graphics were almost non-existent. Music was limited to a few beeps, but the games seemed to generate their own entertainment. Because the user had to think along with the game. No visual effects could replace the excitement of the game. Everything required slow, focused attention. Especially Space Impact was one of the most iconic games of the era. A spaceship in the top left corner. Enemies come from the right. You move the ship up, down, forward, backward. You shoot. You use rockets. You take a shield. And as you progress through each level, the enemies speed up. The game's logic is simple, but as you progress, a challenge begins. You have to figure out the enemy's rhythm and memorize the patterns. Sometimes you turn off the game's sound, but it still echoes in your mind. Beep, 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 beep. These games also created a sense of competition, because the score was saved on each device, and that score was just for you. Sometimes you would compete with your sibling or friend. You would say, "I got 123. They would get 128. This competition turned into a social bond. But no one would take the device from you. They would just ask, "How many did you get?" And every number became a memory. Those numbers were not just digits. They were markers of time. They are idle moments measured by the duration of the game. Boring moments in class, the silence in the waiting room, long journeys. All of them are filled with these games. It's as if these games have flattened the curves of time. Another feature of button phone games was that they didn't require an internet connection. While today you need a constant connection to play games, back then the games were always ready. You could immediately access the menu and start the game. Even without a connection, the game was there. This simplicity provided constant access to entertainment. And the game didn't load, it didn't wait, it opened. The stubborn survival of keypad phones actually reveals a strange balance in technology. It is not the most advanced that survives, but the most durable. Keypad phones are now a symbol of simplicity, minimalism, and longevity. Perhaps that is why they are still with us. And they will probably continue to be here for some time to come. And behind this longevity lies not only technical durability, but also an intriguing aspect of human psychology. For some users, keypad phones are not just a communication tool, but also a source of comfort. The screen glare, constant notifications, and perpetual sense of connectivity offered by today's smartphones have become exhausting for many. For this reason, keypad phones are sometimes seen as an escape today. The simple menus, Small screens and limited interaction through physical keys offer the user a restricted world. But perhaps that is precisely why they become valuable. Keypad phones do not have social media apps. Wi-Fi connectivity is absent in most of them. When you press a button, that's all it does. No animations, no effects. Simple, quiet, and reliable. This simplicity is especially vital for older users. Large, clear buttons, readable fonts, and fixed menu structures offer significant conveniences for those struggling to adapt to new technology. Additionally, many keypad phone models feature an emergency call function. Holding down a button for an extended period automatically dials a specific number. For those who cannot adapt to touchscreens, this is a simple yet effective solution. Sometimes technology does not progress. It regresses, but for the right reasons. Another reason why keypad phones are still preferred is battery life. Today's smartphones, with their high-resolution screens, powerful processors, and constantly active background applications, often struggle to last a full day. In contrast, keypad phones offer standby times of 5 to 10 days, with batteries ranging from 800 to 1200 milliamp hours. This was once normal. Today, it seems extraordinary. This simplicity is a significant advantage, especially for travelers, those using backup lines, or those who don't want to be distracted by anything other than direct communication. Price is also a factor that cannot be ignored. Keypad phones are inexpensive due to their low production costs. While smartphones can cost thousands of dollars, a simple keypad phone can be purchased for between $30 and $50. This makes them still accessible. And perhaps that's why, even in 2025, you might still see a Nokia 105 model in the glass display cases of some technology stores. Sometimes yellow, sometimes classic black. Keypad phones are also preferred by certain professional groups: construction workers, field staff, security personnel, military personnel. Thanks to models that are resistant to drops, dust, mud, and impacts, these phones offer practical solutions. Some keypad phones are even IP certified. They are water-resistant and impact-resistant. And the screen is unbreakable, because the screen is so small that it is almost non-existent. Today, millions of keypad phones are still sold worldwide every year. Especially in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East markets. These devices are actively used in regions with limited infrastructure. In developed countries, they are often chosen as a second phone. And sometimes they are purchased purely for nostalgia. People pick up an old model, and as they type a message, they are transported back in time. Perhaps because their first loves, first messages, and first calls were all experienced through those devices. In conclusion, keypad phones are now technologically outdated in today's world. However, this obsolescence has not eliminated them. On the contrary, it has become a reason for some people to choose them. Simple, safe, durable, and quiet. Just like some nights. And perhaps that is precisely why they continue to exist in a drawer, a mother's bag, a child's toy box, or an elderly grandfather's pocket. I hope this quiet, detail-rich journey has slowed your mind a little. And if your eyes are starting to feel heavy right now, then this video has done its job. Today, keypad phones continue to exist not only as a means of communication, but also as a conscious choice. In an era where everything is becoming smart, deliberately choosing a dumb device is actually a form of silent resistance. Using a non-smartphone is also a response to distraction, screen addiction, and the endless notification loop. It seems possible to reduce the complexity of life with a simple device. For this reason, some users are content with just being reachable. Being reachable is enough. Being able to respond is also sufficient. The rest is silence. Keypad phones have also left an emotional mark on human memory. Many of us experienced our first love messages, first heartbreaks, and first awaited calls through these devices. We remember those nights when we fell asleep waiting for a message that never came. How meaningful sentences written within a 160-character limit can be. The vibration of silent phones under pillows. Seeing the one new message notification at night. These are not technological memories, but emotional ones. And the texture of those keys still lingers in the memory of many of our fingers. At times, especially for users seeking nostalgia, keypad phones are like a game, a challenge. For a mind filled with modern habits, it must be slowed down again. Gestures like tapping, swiping, and double-clicking, which have become automatic, don't work here. Typing messages with a T9 keyboard becomes something that must be relearned. You may need to press multiple keys for each letter. And while this slowness may seem frustrating at first, it eventually transforms into a kind of mental cleansing. The decrease in speed allows the mind to slow down as well. Because every key pressed is a choice. Every word written is conscious. Additionally, keypad phones redefine privacy and personal boundaries. On smartphones, location is often shared constantly, apps remain open, and cameras may be active. However, none of these exist on a keypad device. There is no location tracking system. There is no email synchronization. Since it is not connected to the internet, it cannot collect data. This simplicity also fosters a sense of security. The device does only what it is meant to do: make calls, send messages, and display the time. There is nothing more to it. It is not lacking. It is simply simple. Another important aspect to remember is that keypad phones are known for their durability. Today, repairing a cracked screen on a smartphone can cost nearly half the price of the device itself. However, when a button phone falls to the ground, the cover usually comes off. The battery pops out, but the device continues to work. This simplicity may not make it indestructible, but it makes it resilient. The charging port doesn't break. The touchscreen doesn't shatter. Issues like insufficient RAM don't arise. Even if the buttons accumulate fingerprints over time, they keep working. And this is highly valued by some users. In fact, keypad phones are now being reintroduced with some smart features. These new generation models, referred to as feature phones, combine keypad functionality with limited smart features. For example, some models support WhatsApp. However, the screen is small, typing is difficult. So even if the app is available, you can't spend too much time on it. This is a deliberate limitation designed by manufacturers. It has been intentionally slowed down to encourage people to communicate through conversation rather than social media. Interestingly, sales of these models have been increasing in recent years. Especially users seeking a digital detox are turning to such phones. Despite all this, keypad phones are now seen as a relic of the past. They don't appear in advertisements. They're on the back shelves in stores. But they haven't completely disappeared. Because there's always a need for an old phone somewhere. In a pocket, a drawer, a spare line, or a mother's long-lasting battery stash. Keypad phones are the silent witnesses of a forgotten era. And sometimes, the true power of a technology lies not in screen resolution, processor speed, or camera pixels, but in how much simplicity it can carry. Perhaps that's why, on some nights, they pass by as quietly as the sound of a keypad phone shutting off. Keypad phones are not just electronic devices. They are also silent witnesses of an era, carriers of a way of life. Although they may be technologically outdated today, they still hold a very strong place in the memories of a certain generation. These phones represent the first calling experience for many people. Most people remember that first moment of dialing a number they had memorized. That simple moment, when fingers touched the numbers one by one and the screen responded with a small sound, left much deeper impressions than the digital habits of the past. In modern smartphones, when someone wants to call a person, they simply select the name. However, with push-button phones, this process is more conscious. Each number must be entered individually. Each selection involves awareness. This actually removes it from being a mechanical action. It leaves an impression on the user's mind. The impact of push-button phones on social life is also noteworthy. The culture of texting was born with these devices. Character limits taught people to think carefully when writing short messages. Emotions that could fit into 160 characters were written with carefully chosen words. Unlike today's instant messaging habits, in the past, people would think twice or 3 times before sending a message. Every word written had a meaning, a tone, a message. And most of the time, these messages were sent late at night, in those quiet, sleepless hours. The vibration of the keypad phone was the only alert coming from under the pillow. Even that sound carried emotional connotations for a time. There was no blue tick like there is now. Whether it was red or not was unknown, but it was waited for, patiently, perhaps for hours. Some keypad phone models have become cult classics in their own right. Devices like the Nokia 3310, Motorola RAZR, and Ericsson T28 stood out not only for their durability, but also for their design. Especially the flip models had become a status symbol. The clicking sound when opening the phone was almost a statement of power. This physical action created a more solid, tangible, and real impact compared to today's screen swipes. When the phone rang, the flip opened, and the conversation began. When the conversation ended, it was closed again. An action began, an action ended. Touching the screen to speak or end a call today offers a much more abstract and emotionless experience. Keypad phones had also come to reflect a social divide. In the early years of touchscreen devices, keypad phones reflected economic class. However, what was interesting was that some people did not want to switch to a smartphone. More accurately, they found it unnecessary. For them, the function of a device was to be accessible, to be reachable, and to receive messages. Anything more was distracting. These people still use these phones today, and this is a conscious choice. Today, push-button phones are still used in some workplaces, especially for corporate lines. This offers both a cost advantage and ensures that employees use the phone solely for work purposes. In other words, these devices are not just nostalgic mementos, but also current solutions. Some users turn off their smartphones completely and use push-button phones as a second line. This preference is particularly common among busy professionals. This allows people to step away from the complexity of their smart devices and focus solely on their basic communication needs. Push-button phones are also frequently used as backup phones in families. A new phone is purchased, and the old one is put away in a box. but it is not thrown away, because it might be needed one day. That day comes. It is charged, the SIM card is inserted, and it starts working again. Sometimes it comes in handy for a relative. Sometimes it is given to a neighbor. Or maybe it is just kept in a drawer for nostalgia. But generally, it still works. Because these devices are simple, there are few parts that can break. If necessary, the battery is replaced, and it comes back to life. And this is something that is rarely true for modern technology. As we saw in the second section, keypad phones are not just a product of a particular era's technology. They are also a representation of a culture, a habit, a way of life. The transition to touchscreens was swift, but some habits lingered behind, and those habits sometimes resonate more deeply within a person. Pressing buttons, waiting, typing. Slow, but deliberate actions. And perhaps the only sound accompanying a sleepless night. When people think of technology today, the first things that come to mind are speed and performance. Higher screen refresh rates, faster processors, brighter panels, larger batteries. However, amidst this rush, there is a structure that quietly persists: the physical simplicity of keypad phones. These devices appear primitive when compared to modern smartphones. But perhaps their greatest achievement lies precisely in this simplicity. Because the fewer things there are, the fewer things can break. Keypad phones, especially those produced in the early 2000s, were quite robust in terms of build quality. It is still possible to find a Nokia 3310 or Sony Ericsson K300i that works today. Because these phones were typically made from thick plastic. Their bodies are flexible yet durable. They are resistant to drops. There are no metal frames, glass back panels, or large screens. The most likely part to crack is the back cover. Once it's reattached, the device continues to function as before. Their screens are small, so they're less prone to breaking. And since they're not touchscreens, scratches aren't a major concern. Many users remember how indestructible keypad phones were in an interesting way. These devices, which could survive falling down several flights of stairs, being submerged in water and then dried out, or sitting in a drawer for years and still turning on when charged, seem to defy time. While modern phones are used with protective cases, most keypad phones were carried in pockets alongside keys. Their durability was so robust that they didn't even require a case. Another legendary aspect is battery life. Keypad phones typically come with small-capacity batteries ranging from 900 to 1200 milliamp hours. While this may be considered insufficient for a smartphone today, it was more than adequate for that era. This is because the device's energy requirements are low. Thanks to the small screen, limited processor power, and simple operating system, the battery can last for weeks. Some models can last up to 20 days in standby mode. When used solely for calls and messages, the battery only needs to be charged a few times a month. This is almost a utopia by today's standards. Additionally, these batteries are typically user-removable. Unlike modern devices, you can remove the battery by taking off the back cover and replace it with another one. Moreover, no technical knowledge is required to do this. Simply open the cover, remove the battery, and install the new one. This way, a phone with a dead battery is not completely discarded. Only the battery is replaced. This is also an important advantage in terms of sustainability. Today, most phones require repair when the battery dies. But for keypad phones, it's just a matter of using a screwdriver. Heat issues are also minimal. This is because the processors are simple. Since they are not connected to the internet, there are no background services running. No apps are loaded. No videos are watched. GPS does not work. The entire system is built around calling and messaging. Therefore, the battery is not wasted, and the device is not unnecessarily strained. This extends the usage time and lifespan of the device. Additionally, the chargers are universal. In the mid-2000s, most keypad phones charged using the same port. The thick-tipped charger used for Nokia devices was almost universally available in homes. If someone didn't have a charger at home, their neighbor certainly did. Today, however, each device requires a different connector, cable, and adapter. This is one of the common complications users face. During the era of keypad phones, such issues did not exist. There were uniform devices, uniform chargers, and long-term usage. Water resistance is not officially available in most models. However, due to their simple structure, water penetration into the device is difficult. Some users claim that they were able to wash and dry their keypad phones in a washing machine and still use them afterward. This is, of course, not something manufacturers recommend, but it is a typical example of how durable these devices are. While a cracked screen on a smartphone renders it unusable today, a keypad phone can return to normal with just a bit of drying. In conclusion, the hardware durability of keypad phones elevates them beyond ordinary technological products. They are not merely tools, but rather technological characters. Quiet, space-saving, unbreakable, unreliable, and devices that won't blame you even if you forget to charge them for months. And perhaps that is why they still lie quietly in some pockets, some bags, some drawers, waiting for the day when they will be needed again. While keypad phones are considered a stop on the evolutionary path of technology, in some ways, they have begun to become part of the future rather than the past. In recent years, a new generation of keypad devices, referred to as feature phones, have been reintroduced to the market with advanced features, but a design that maintains simplicity. These devices retain the traditional keypad phone appearance, while also offering limited internet, messaging, and media support. However, these limitations are a conscious design choice. Those who choose these devices do so with full awareness of their limitations. The feature phone trend has gained momentum, particularly with the rise of the concept of digital detox. People have grown tired of constantly staring at screens, social media notifications, and app addiction. For millions who no longer know how many times they check their phones daily, a solution was needed. This is where keypad phones have re-emerged. Users who are buying them again are, in a way, seeking ways to reconnect with technology rather than escape it. Because keypad phones do not constantly keep you occupied. They do not disturb you with app notifications. They do not create the urge to check what's happening. They are quiet. They are still. They work when needed and remain in their corner the rest of the time. Some new generation keypad phones can run limited applications such as WhatsApp. However, the small screen size and the difficulty of typing on the keypad slow down the use of these applications. This forces the user to be more careful. In essence, the applications are there, but they are limited. They do not create dependency. The device does not alert the user, but responds when necessary. Feature phones are also seen as part of the modern minimalism trend. Less charging, less data consumption, fewer visual stimuli. There is also growing interest in such devices among the younger generation, because for some young people, these phones are not just old-fashioned, but also a liberating option. For those who want to stay away from social media pressure, photo competitions, and the obligation to respond to messages, a simple device means slowing down the rhythm of life. A phone you don't have to look at all day creates mental space. And these spaces are valuable areas for thinking, reading, writing, or simply staying silent. In the corporate world, some companies have begun assigning their employees keypad phones with only call and SMS features. This reduces distractions and ensures data security. Especially in sectors such as security, logistics, manufacturing, and transportation, millions of people still work with such devices. Keypad phones are simple yet effective representatives of modern technology in these fields. In rural areas, places with weak infrastructure, or regions prone to frequent power outages, keypad phones remain the first choice. They are durable, have long battery life, and do not waste unnecessary data. Some models still have radios. Some devices can even be used as flashlights. This transforms them into not just phones, but versatile small tools. And this functionality makes them invisible, yet essential. In conclusion, keypad phones are no longer just a relic of the past, but also a possibility for the future. They have become the device of choice for those seeking a simple life in the digital age, those who want to maintain a distance from technology, and those who prefer to stay connected only when necessary. And perhaps this is the real reason behind their resurgence. Too much of anything can be exhausting. What is missing, however, can be soothing. Much has been said about keypad phones up to this point, but perhaps the least discussed aspect is their mental and psychological impact. Yes, they are technically outdated, functionally limited, and nostalgically designed. However, people's reason for returning to these devices is not solely functional. It is also emotional, and to some extent, mental. Time spent with a keypad phone does not reduce attention. It enhances it. Hours spent without looking at a screen do not strain the eyes. Silent notifications allow communication without disrupting inner peace. This silence is not loneliness for some people. It means relaxation. Because modern phones are not just a tool. They have become a distraction machine. Social media feeds, instant messages, games, apps, news notifications, email alerts. All these elements cause the brain to be constantly stimulated. And over time, this stimulation leads to mental fatigue. This does not happen with keypad phones. The device works but does not attract attention. It is there but invisible. Just like a pen sitting on a desk. Silent, simple, functional. Such phones also change the perception of time. In modern phones, time is measured by screen time. It is shaped by how much you look, how much you scroll, how much you click. However, time flows differently on keypad phones. There is a clock, there is an alarm, but the rest is up to you. You are not tied to the outside world's alerts. This provides mental clarity. Keypad phones also bring a different balance to human relationships. Since calling is more cumbersome, you tend to call important people. Since writing messages takes time, the messages you send have meaning. And this simplifies relationships. The tension often experienced today from seeing but not responding does not exist with these devices. Because communication is not fast, it is slow. This slowness brings patience, understanding, and tolerance. It may seem a bit old-fashioned, but sometimes the old is better. Ultimately, Keypad phones are no longer just a matter of technology. They are a choice, a form of slowing down, a path to simplicity. Sometimes stepping away from all the distractions can bring more focus, more peace, deeper sleep. Perhaps that's why some nights we don't need the screen light, just the sound of a vibration. A simple, small device, but it offers great silence. And that silence is sometimes the only thing we need before sleep. Thank you for watching this series. Perhaps one of the most forgotten but profound effects of push-button phones is on our tactile memory. Over the years, our fingertips became so accustomed to those small plastic buttons that we actually memorized the location of each letter, number, and directional key. Typing with a T9 keyboard had become a skill that required no thought. Each key had 3 or 4 letters assigned to it. To select a letter, you had to press that key a certain number of times. For the letter C, you pressed the 2 key 3 times. For S, you pressed the 7 key 4 times. These repetitive motions eventually became unconscious. It was almost like a form of writing meditation. It was not the letters that were remembered, but the rhythm. Writing "I miss you" was not just a message. It was an internal dance of the thumb. These devices did not offer automatic correction or suggestion systems like modern phones do. Every word was consciously chosen while typing. This made the messages slower but more meaningful. Today we rarely think while typing on keyboards. Sentences flow effortlessly. But typing on a keypad phone was a ritual. Selecting letters, forming words, composing, and sending the message. Throughout this entire process, the mind followed every step. This heightened the level of attention. It was almost impossible to write and think about something else at the same time. This both slowed down and deepened communication with a keypad phone. Our fingers still remember those devices. Even today, when we pick up a keypad phone, we start navigating through the menus with our thumb. Even when the device is turned off, it fits comfortably in our hand. It is light yet sturdy. Its weight is just right for our hand. It doesn't feel too heavy or too light. The plastic surface has been shaped over time by fingerprints. Some keys have been used more than others. The slight scratch above the 5 key has formed over time from being pressed. The plus sign that appears when the 0 key is pressed for a long time creates an association with international calls. In other words, these devices not only store voice and messages, but also fingerprints. They are like a digital memory book. They appear simple on the outside, but they carry the silent traces of habits within. The menu structure of keypad phones also triggers another memory. There are no complicated settings or endless submenus like today. Access to the entire system is typically provided by 4 directional keys, a central confirmation key, and 2 option keys. You enter the menu, scroll down, and access messages, call logs, tone settings, games. Everything is simple but sufficient, and perhaps that's precisely why everything could be remembered. The interfaces were similar. Even if a new model was purchased, the system remained the same. This offered a user experience that required no learning. Today's smartphones have different interfaces for each brand. A search bar is needed to find something. But on keypad phones, everything was in its place. There was an unchanging order, a timeless stability. Even ringtones have carved out a special place in our memories. Polyphonic melodies, single-tone sounds, sometimes a classical music adaptation. Startup melodies that varied by device brand. Farewell sounds when turned off. All of these are small sound motifs etched into our memories. An old Nokia tone coming from a distance can instantly transport someone back to years ago. Those melodies are not just sounds, they are chains of associations. They may remind us of a summer vacation, a message received late at night, or an unanswered call. These sounds may no longer be heard, but in some minds, they continue to play on. Games are also part of this memory. The snake game is the first mobile gaming experience for many people. A snake, moving left and right on a black and white screen, increasingly difficult maneuvers as it grows, rising scores, and eventually, a collision. Compared to today's visually stunning games, it's simple, but it's effective. Because the game isn't just about passing time, it's also a way to connect with the device. These games create a small space for activity within quiet moments. They teach you to get to know the device. They help you master the keys. And keypad phones become not just communication tools, but also gaming devices. They offer entertainment within simplicity. The reason keypad phones have remained in memory for so long is not about technology, but about the relationship they establish with people. They are not consumer goods, but rather objects, like a chair, a table, or a bag. They are used, they wear out, but they are not discarded. In fact, for many people, their first phone is still kept in a box at home, with the battery removed and the screen wiped clean, preserved as a memento. Because that phone is not just a device. It is the first message, the first wait, the first patience, the first unanswered call. Perhaps this is the main reason why push-button phones are still around. They are devices that are integrated with the things people touch, wait for, think about, and hear. And even as technology advances, people remain the same. They want to touch. They want to wait. And sometimes they want to stay awake until morning just for a message. Push-button phones offer this experience. Perhaps slow, perhaps limited, but meaningful. And that's why their sound can still be heard from somewhere far away. Perhaps in a drawer. Perhaps in an old mother's wallet. Perhaps in a child's toy box. But it rings. Because that sound is not just a call. It is a reminder. Time has accelerated with technology. But there was a time when time flowed slowly, and waiting was not a habit, but a necessity. Keypad phones were at the heart of that slow-paced era. Back then, when you sent a message to someone, you didn't expect an immediate response. Because no one checked their phone every moment. The phone was at the bottom of your pocket. Sometimes it was on a shelf. Sometimes it was in another room. So even if the message reached the recipient immediately, it took time for it to reach them mentally. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 5 hours passed before the reply came. But this waiting had a rhythm. People were patient. They would read the sentences in their minds a few more times. They might think, did I write something wrong? Is something missing? This thought slowed down communication, but deepened it. There was no blue tick like today. There was no seen label. Sometimes only the question, did it go, remained. This uncertainty made people more careful. Conversations, sentences, and emotions did not scatter in an instant. Because even writing a sentence took time. Selecting the letters one by one, slowly. Deleting the entire word when you press the wrong key. Starting over. All of this made writing valuable. Every message was a thoughtful post. Every word was deliberate. Every punctuation mark was an intention. This slow passage of time also defined the gaps in the day. There were other things to do after sending a message. You didn't wait by the phone. Until the reply came, you read a book, went outside, focused on other things. That little device didn't keep you busy. It only came into play when needed. It didn't create the need to constantly check the screen like today. Because the screen was small, there was no notification light. If there was an incoming call or message, you only knew by the sound. Otherwise, there was silence. And this silence opened up a vast space in the mind. Thoughts lingered longer. Emotions were processed more deeply. Waiting with a push-button phone was not just about communication. It also shaped the overall rhythm of life. When an appointment was made, you had to be there at that time, because it wasn't easy to call someone and ask, "Where are you?" If you called and couldn't reach them, you waited. "Maybe they're on their way," you'd say. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Maybe they won't come. But people waited. This waiting revealed the heavy yet human nature of time. Today, we can track real-time coordinates, live maps, and online status. But back then, there was only guesswork, and guesswork enhanced human empathy. Will they come or not? Did something happen? Why aren't they responding? All these questions created a mental connection. It was not technology but feelings that guided us. Even the alarm on a push-button phone showed time differently. When the alarm was set, waking up in the morning was a necessity. It was just a melody. But it was enough. There were no alerts from 5 different apps like today. The day began with just one alarm. And throughout the day, the sound of that alarm echoed in the mind. When the alarm rang, what needed to be done was clear. There was no delay. Postponing was rare. Because to silence the alarm on a push-button phone, you had to press several buttons at the same time. This effort made postponing meaningless. You woke up. The day began. Living with a push-button phone meant accepting time. There was no rushing, no constant checking, no endless messaging, no constant access to information. Perhaps that's why time seemed to pass more slowly. Days felt more full. Because everything was experienced piece by piece. You couldn't do 5 things at once. You would talk to one person, then another. Everything was in order. And this rhythm created by order brought a sense of structure to the human mind. While today we are lost in chaos and an overload of information, back then there was simplicity. Only what was necessary existed. Perhaps that is why push-button phones still come out of some pockets. Perhaps that's why some people put their smartphones away for a while. Perhaps that's why waiting is being rediscovered. Because waiting slows you down. It makes you think. It makes you patient. And for some things, it's worth waiting for. This absence is replaced by something else: sincerity. Push-button phones do not mechanize communication. On the contrary, they make it more human, simpler, slower, and therefore more real. Because every communication established with these devices requires a little more effort, a little more intention. And it is from that effort that words gain meaning. Calling someone is not as easy a decision on a push-button phone as it is today. On smartphones, you swipe your finger. The call starts. The conversation continues if it does, and it can be ended if necessary. But on a push-button phone, you first enter the number. Or you select the person from the directory, then press the call button, and the phone starts ringing. This process alone causes you to pause and think for a moment. Should I really call? What will I say? Maybe it will ring for a while, but they won't answer. Maybe they're not available. Maybe just sending a message would be enough. These small moments of reflection make communication conscious rather than random. And conscious communication is the first step towards sincerity. Writing a message to someone isn't that easy either. When typing with a T9 keyboard, you have to abbreviate words. Instead of, "How are you?" you write, "How are you?" But even that brevity carries a warmth. Writing that message means you are truly thinking about that person. Because it takes time and effort. That's why messages aren't sent randomly. Every message has a context, a reason, a response. Today, messages flow without thinking because they are instantaneous. But messages written on a keypad phone are often introspective. They are written first, then reread. Maybe they are deleted, maybe they are rewritten. And then, there is a pause before pressing the send button. That pause is actually a sign of the importance given to the other person. Conversations on push-button phones are also different. Instead of constantly sending voice messages like today, you actually have to call. You have to talk, hear their voice, and construct sentences one by one. And most of the time, conversations are short but meaningful. Because talking means putting everything else aside for a while. Since the push-button phone screen is small, you don't switch to another app while talking. You don't do anything else. You just talk. In other words, communication is done with attention. This increases sincerity. Listening to the other person, really hearing them, and just being in the moment. This is inherent in the communication established with a push-button phone. On some devices, you hear a "cannot reach the other party" message. Even this message is an emotion. You cannot reach the person you are calling, but this is also part of communication. Maybe they are busy. Maybe their phone is dead. Maybe there is no signal. It is unknown. But that unknown creates a bond. Over time, that unknown becomes a habit. You cannot always reach that person. And this teaches you to be patient. Today, the fact that everyone is always reachable creates a strange pressure. But in the push-button phone era, this pressure does not exist. Because not being able to reach someone is normal. Waiting is natural. And this naturalness makes communication more gentle, more thoughtful, more understanding. There were also voicemails. If the other party was busy or couldn't respond, a voicemail was left. A short message like, "I called, I'll try again later," was left. Or there was just silence. And that silence sometimes spoke volumes. Hearing a human voice is something that cannot be replaced, even in today's world of emojis. The tremor, hesitation, sincerity, or longing in that voice. These cannot be put into words. Push-button phones knew the value of sound. Talking was not just about conveying information. It was about conveying emotion. Friendships, relationships, and loves formed through push-button phones were experienced in a different way. Messages were sporadic, but deep. Each message was anticipated a little more. The incoming message was read over and over again. Maybe just a sentence, but there was a tone to that sentence. The question, "What are you doing?" was not just curiosity, but interest. Today, even this sentence may seem out of place or simple. But back then, even asking this question was an approach. The good night message made the night beautiful. The good morning message that came in the morning was a ritual. They were small but valuable things. Because they were few. Because they were rare. Because they were hard to write. Additionally, keypad phones created a sense of privacy. Since the devices were small, no one could look at the screen while talking to someone. Since the messages were short, The person next to you couldn't easily see the content. That's why those messages remained personal. Going through someone's phone was considered rude, because everyone's phone only had a few contacts, a few messages, a few photos. The history of push-button phones is filled not only with major features, but also with forgotten, small, yet characteristic details. These details are so small that they fade from view over time. But their silent presence is what gives these devices their soul. Antennas, flashing lights, symbols, startup animations. Each may be just a small component weighing a few grams, but together, they are the details that give keypad phones their personality. Let us now take a closer look at these details with careful attention. Let us start with the antennas. Most early keypad phones had a small antenna that extended outward. Some were fixed, others retractable. Unconsciously pulling and pushing that antenna was a habit when you held the phone. Even if it wasn't necessary, the motion was soothing. It was like a small toy. That antenna represented the phone's connection to the outside world. If the signal was weak somewhere, pulling the antenna offered a glimmer of hope that the signal would improve. Perhaps it didn't have much scientific value, but it had a psychological effect. If the antenna was up, the connection to the world was complete. If the antenna was down, everything felt a bit more inward-looking. This small metal piece was the symbol of communication at the time. Like a heartbeat, it was an extension of the signal. Then, there were the lights. Some keypad phones had small LED lights that flickered on the sides or around the screen frame. This light would slowly glow when a message arrived or a call went unanswered, then fade away in a rhythmic pattern. These lights spoke without a sound. "Someone called you," they said. "Something happened," they said. But it didn't rush you. It quietly alerted you. That small flickering light would sometimes reflect faintly off the wall in the darkness of the room, breathing like a rhythm. Instead of the notification deluge of modern phones, this single light was a messenger. A small spark of information in the darkness, simple but effective. And perhaps that's why it's unforgettable. The keypad itself carried a design language. Each key was the same size, but each had its place. The 5 key in the middle usually had a small raised bump. This bump guided your thumb even with your eyes closed. That small protrusion was like a compass. The left and right direction keys were sometimes slightly curved inward. The click sound when you pressed them was a way to know they were pressed. It was felt but not heard. Each key had its own spring mechanism underneath. This gave a slightly different response with each press, imprinting itself on your finger's memory. While today's touchscreens try to provide auditory feedback, they can't fully replicate that mechanical response. Menu icons varied from device to device, but they shared a common simplicity. Messages were typically represented by an envelope icon, settings by a gear icon, contacts by a person's silhouette. On some phones, the music icon was a note, and some models even had a calendar leaf, and everything was conveyed with a simple icon. Colors were limited. Most devices had monochrome screens. Green-black or blue-white screens were common. This simplicity made the menus simpler and easier to understand. The eyes weren't strained by complex graphics. Each icon not only explained what it was, but also imprinted itself on the memory. When entering the menu, the icon came first, then the word. The mind would recall the meaning upon seeing the icon. Opening and closing animations should also not be forgotten. Nokia's animation of hands reaching out to each other was one of the most watched video clips of its time, as it appeared every time the device was turned on. That animation gave the device a personality. An opening melody, a screen light, perhaps a vibration. All of these elements combined to form the phone's personality. The device was not just a tool, but a companion. The farewell sound that played when it was turned off did not signify an end, but rather a "see you later." These sounds were part of the silent bond formed with the user. And then there was the battery icon. While battery indicators have become more complex today, back then they were a simple battery shape. Sometimes 3 bars, sometimes 5. As the battery drained, the bars would decrease. When the last bar started to flash, it was clear the charge was running out. This icon functioned like the ticking of a clock. It conveyed the message that time was running out, but it didn't cause panic. Because batteries lasted a long time. Days. So even if the last bar lit up, people remained calm. Slowness was evident here as well. The battery running out wasn't a sudden event, but a slowly approaching stop. And this stop was the last message the device gave before shutting down. Today, most of these details are gone. Antennas have been replaced by internal systems. Lights are embedded within the screen. The reason why push-button phones remained in our lives for so long was not just because their batteries lasted a long time or could be replaced. These features provided a kind of mental comfort and emotional stability. The device didn't burden the user. It didn't hassle them. It didn't demand anything. It gently reminded them, patiently waited, and quietly served them. The battery would run out, recharge, and start again. It was like a friend more patient than us. Today, much has changed. But sometimes, seeing the words "battery charging" on the screen of an old push-button phone sitting in a drawer brings a strange sense of peace. Because that phrase doesn't just mean the battery is charging. It means time is passing. And in that moment, there's no need to rush anywhere. The way the day begins greatly influences how the day will unfold. Today, smartphones don't just ring the alarm at the first light of day. They bombard the screen with notifications. News headlines, messages, social media alerts. All assault a mind that hasn't fully awakened yet. But mornings were different in the era of push-button phones. They were quiet, plain, and simple. The only thing that started the day was a melody. And that melody just played and faded away. Nothing flashed on the screen. It didn't give any warnings or advice. It simply announced that it was time, and the person would wake up. The alarm melodies of push-button phones were limited. There were usually 5 to 10 different options. Some were high-pitched, some were soft, some were annoyingly irritating. But each had a simple, repetitive structure. The most commonly used ones became etched into the mind over time. And those melodies didn't just play, they carried an emotion. Because a person who wakes up to the same sound for years eventually begins to hear it not just as an alarm, but as a sign of time. When they heard that melody coming from a friend's pocket one day, they involuntarily felt like they were running late. That sound created an internal reflex. It was an emotion paired with habit. Waking up in the morning is not easy, especially on winter mornings. But when the alarm on the push-button phone rang, people didn't just get up. Turning off that sound was also a small ceremony. Unlocking the keypad, finding the menu, selecting the snooze or stop option. These few seconds of action slowly opened their eyes. Not immediately, but gently. Because pressing those small buttons while still half asleep was not easy. It took a little effort. And that effort actually made waking up easier. You woke up while trying to turn off the alarm. There was no swiping the screen to the side and going back to sleep like you can now. To go back to sleep, you had to set the alarm again. That wasn't an easy task either. So if you turned off the alarm, it was time to get up. Even if there was a snooze feature, it was limited. Usually you only got one snooze. You'd say, "Ring again in 5 minutes," and the phone would fall silent. And those 5 minutes, they felt like the longest stretch of time ever. The alarm on a button phone didn't rush to wake you up, but it didn't forget its job either. So, over time, people developed their own internal clocks. The time that passed after the alarm went off helped the body wake up. And this help was gentle, not harsh. There were no aggressive vibrations, sudden screen lights, or automatic news feeds like there are today. Just a sound. Just a time. On some phones, after the alarm rang, the screen would only display the time. 7 a.m. Nothing else. Weather, notifications, email summaries, today's meetings. None of these would be thrust into your eyes. So waking up was less exhausting. The eye would focus only on the time. The mind would only receive the message. It's morning now. Thus, the day would begin not with the chaos of the outside world, but with the calmness of the inner world. Some phones could also play the radio as an alarm, though this feature wasn't very common. On devices that had it, waking up to music in the morning was possible. When the radio played, sometimes a foreign song would be heard, sometimes a news bulletin. These surprising beginnings allowed one to start the day with a little curiosity, stimulating the mind with gentle questions such as, "Who is singing?" or "What happened?" But it still did not distract one's attention. Because the phone's screen was small and the content was limited. The mind started the day with just a warning, without being overloaded. The alarm ringing while charging was another ritual. The phone, plugged in overnight, would wake up with the alarm in the morning. The message, "Alarm ringing," would appear on the screen, perhaps silenced with a few taps. And then, silence would begin. At that moment the phone was still charging. It would remain by the bedside, still connected to the cable. The device had completed its task. And now it was ready for the new day. The back cover of a push-button phone was much more than just a technological component. This simple plastic piece on the back of a device sometimes held a secret, sometimes harbored a habit. While today's screens hide worlds within them, back then technology was outwardly visible, designed to be seen. And opening the back of a keypad phone was not just a process, but a way of connecting. Because beneath that cover lay not just a battery or SIM card, but the intimate connection between the user and the phone. Every phone's back cover was unique. Some could be easily opened with a fingernail, while others required a bit of force. Some users were very careful when opening the cover, as the thin plastic could break. Sometimes there were small cracks inside the cover, but it still fit in place. Those cracks were the device's life story. Had it been dropped? Had it been closed too forcefully? Had it worn out over time? All of this was hidden in the texture of the cover. Perhaps its color had faded, but it still functioned. When you reached under the cover, you would typically find two things: the battery and the SIM card slot. But this area carried not only technical components but also personal touches. Many people would place small notes, photos, or name tags under the phone's back cover. Sometimes a password, sometimes a list of names, sometimes an emergency contact number. This habit was a kind of assurance, because if the phone was lost, whoever found it would open the cover and see the note inside. Or if the user forgot their password, that small piece of paper hidden under the cover would help them. Remembering with paper, not with technology. That was the reflex of that era. The SIM card slot was a small but important detail. The SIM card was the part that gave life to that device. The phone's identity and its connection with the user passed through it. That slot was usually covered with metal ridges. You had to be careful when inserting the card. If you inserted it the wrong way, the device wouldn't recognize the SIM. When the SIM card was removed, the phone didn't lose all its memory. But calls, messages, and contacts suddenly went silent. That small card was, in fact, the connection between the user and the world. Sometimes a SIM would be removed and inserted into another phone. This transition was not just a technical process, but a decision. Saying goodbye to the old phone and starting with the new one. But the SIM card always carried the user's memory. Sometimes small prayers or verses written on paper were placed under the back cover. This was a kind of spiritual protection to prevent the phone from being lost, stolen, or damaged. Some users would write the name of someone they loved on the inside of the cover, with a pen, a marker, sometimes just a letter, an initial. These small writings would fade over time, but their trace remained. Because these writings were not just ink, they were also a mark of connection. Writing something in one's own handwriting inside a phone gave it an identity. The back cover was also the personality of the phone. Over time, it would get scratched, its color would fade, and its corners would wear out. But it was not replaced, because those marks were the character of the device. Sometimes users would buy covers in different colors: blue, red, transparent. Neon-colored covers for some phones were the fashion of the time. These made the device stand out from the ordinary and gave it a personal touch. But the original cover held a special place. There were memories beneath that cover. And of course, the battery cover was often the part most prone to falling off. When a phone hit the ground, the back cover was the first part to come off. The battery would pop out, the SIM card would shift, but the cover always flew off. This had also created another habit: bending down to pick up the phone's parts one by one after it fell. It was almost like a ritual. First the battery, then the SIM card, and finally the back cover were found, and everything was put back in place. The phone was reassembled, brought back together, and it kept working. This ritual created a physical connection between the user and the device. Not with the touchscreen, but with the feeling of putting the pieces back together. The inside of the back cover is silent. It is invisible. But it is actually a door to the heart of the phone. In today's devices, the cover cannot be opened, the battery cannot be removed, and special pins are required for the SIM card. But back then, all these parts could be touched by hand. This brought people closer to technology. Opening the back cover was the first step in getting to know a device, because knowing the inside of the device meant connecting with it. And perhaps that's why the back covers of keypad phones were not just for protection, but also a surface for expression.